Oakwood High School, nestled in the heart of a diverse suburban community, was about to become the epicenter of an unexpected controversy. When Jasmine Carter, a bright and ambitious 16-year-old black girl, set up her lemonade stand for charity, she had no idea of the deep-seated prejudices she would encounter. As tensions mounted and conflicts escalated, Police Chief Ryan Callahan, frustrated with the town's changing demographics, saw Jasmine's stand as an opportunity to assert his authority. But when Jasmine's father Marcus arrived on the scene, the situation took an unexpected turn. Marcus wasn't just any parent, and his presence was about to change everything. Who was this mysterious father, and why was his presence so crucial to the unfolding events? How would the collision of a well-meaning teenager, a prejudiced police chief, and a father with a hidden past ignite a firestorm of change in Oakwood? Let's find out. But before we dive into this gripping story, comment below where you're watching from today. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe. The final bell rang at Oakwood High School, signaling the end of another bustling day of learning. Students poured out of the building, their chatter and laughter filling the air with the excitement of freedom. Among them was Jasmine Carter, a 16-year-old girl whose determined stride set her apart from her peers. Jasmine's deep brown eyes sparkled with purpose as she adjusted her backpack, heavy with textbooks on anatomy and biology. Unlike many of her classmates who were eagerly discussing their plans for the afternoon, trips to the mall, basketball practice, or the latest viral videos, Jasmine's mind was occupied with weightier matters. As she walked down the school steps, Jasmine couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation around her. "Did you see that new TikTok challenge?" one girl squealed to her friend. "I can't wait for the party this weekend," a boy exclaimed, high-fiving his buddies. Jasmine smiled politely as she passed them, but inwardly she felt a disconnect. While she enjoyed typical teenage activities, her aspirations reached far beyond the walls of Oakwood and the confines of adolescent concerns. Jasmine's dream of becoming a doctor wasn't just a vague notion of future success. It was a calling, a purpose that drove her every action. As she walked home, her mind drifted to the faces of those she hoped to help one day. Children in developing countries struggling with preventable diseases, elderly patients needing compassionate care, and families torn apart by health crises they couldn't afford to treat. The sound of laughter from a nearby playground brought Jasmine back to the present. She paused, watching a group of children playing on the swings and slides. Their carefree joy was infectious, but it also served as a stark reminder of the inequalities in the world. How many children like them, she wondered, didn't have access to basic health care or the opportunity to just be kids? This thought strengthened Jasmine's resolve. Her lemonade stand wasn't just a school project or a way to pad her college applications. It was her first real step towards making a difference in the world. The money she would raise might seem small in the grand scheme of things, but to Jasmine, it represented hope and the power of individual action. As she continued her walk home, Jasmine's mind wandered to her father, Marcus. She knew he worked for the government, but the specifics of his job were always vague. Sometimes the mystery surrounding her father's profession weighed heavily on her, especially when her friends speculated about what Mr. Carter did for a living. But Jasmine understood the importance of discretion and respected her father's privacy. Lost in thought, Jasmine almost missed the community center as she passed by. The faded sign and peeling paint couldn't diminish the vibrant energy emanating from within. Children's laughter and the thump of basketballs drifted through the open windows. Jasmine smiled, remembering the hours she had spent volunteering there, tutoring younger kids and helping with after-school programs. On impulse, Jasmine decided to stop in. As she pushed open the heavy doors, the familiar scent of floor cleaner and chalk dust greeted her. Miss Thompson, the center's tireless director, looked up from the front desk with a warm smile. "Jasmine, what a pleasant surprise. How are you, dear?" Jasmine approached the desk, her smile widening. "I'm good, Miss Thompson. Just wanted to check in and see how everything's going." Miss Thompson's eyes crinkled with affection. "Oh, you know, same old struggles. The roof's still leaking in the art room, and we're short on volunteers for the summer reading program. But the kids? They're resilient as ever. Jasmine nodded, her resolve strengthening. I was thinking, the lemonade stand I'm setting up for my school project. I want the proceeds to go to the center. Maybe we can fix that roof or get some new books for the reading program. Miss Thompson's eyes welled up with tears. Oh, Jasmine, you're truly one of a kind. Any amount would be a blessing. As Jasmine left the community center, her steps felt lighter. The lemonade stand was no longer just a school project. It was a lifeline for the center and the children it served. She quickened her pace, eager to get home and start planning. But first, there was one more stop she needed to make. Jasmine turned down Maple Street, the familiar sight of Lena's house coming into view. The peeling yellow paint and overgrown lawn spoke volumes about the struggles Lena's family faced. Jasmine's heart ached for her friend, remembering the countless times Lena had confided in her about the difficulties at home. She knocked on the door, hearing muffled voices and the sound of a television from within. After a moment, Lena appeared, her tired eyes brightening at the sight of Jasmine. Hey, Jay, didn't expect to see you today. Jasmine smiled warmly. Just wanted to check in. How are you holding up? Lena shrugged, stepping out onto the porch and closing the door behind her. Same old, Dad's still out of work and Mom's picking up extra shifts at the diner. I'm thinking of dropping out to help more at home. Jasmine's heart sank. She knew how much Lena had struggled in school, but the thought of her friend giving up on education altogether was unbearable. Lena, I know things are tough, but you can't give up, Jasmine said softly, placing a hand on her friend's shoulder. You're smart and capable. You just need to believe in yourself. Lena scoffed, but there was no real bite to it. Easy for you to say, Miss Straight-A's. Not all of us are cut out for the whole school thing. Jasmine shook her head firmly. It's not about being cut out for it. It's about perseverance. You just have to start small and believe things can change. As she spoke, an idea began to form in Jasmine's mind. Hey, why don't you help me with my lemonade stand this weekend? It's for charity, and I could use an extra pair of hands. Lena raised an eyebrow. A lemonade stand? Aren't we a little old for that? Jasmine laughed. It's for a school project, but more importantly, it's for the community center. Every little bit helps, you know? Lena hesitated, then shook her head. Sorry, Jay, I'd love to, but I'm busy this weekend. Mom needs help with some extra shifts at the diner. Maybe next time? Jasmine nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. No worries, I understand. Take care, okay? As Jasmine said goodbye to Lena and continued her walk home, she felt a mix of emotions. Her lemonade stand was becoming more than just a school project or a way to raise money for charity. It was a beacon of hope for the community center and for herself. But she couldn't help feeling a twinge of loneliness, knowing she'd be facing this challenge on her own. Little did she know this simple act of selling lemonade would soon become the catalyst for events that would shake their community to its core. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the streets of Milbrook as Police Chief Ryan Callahan climbed into his patrol car. His weathered face was set in a perpetual frown, deep lines etched around his mouth and eyes, testament to years of stress and, if he was honest with himself, growing bitterness. Callahan's gaze swept over the neighborhood as he pulled away from the station. The once familiar streets now felt alien to him, changed by an influx of new residents and shifting demographics. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was becoming a relic, a holdover from a time that was rapidly fading into memory. Another day in paradise, he muttered sarcastically, adjusting his rear-view mirror. Beside him, Officer Malcolm Green shifted uncomfortably in his seat. At 35, Green was nearly 2 decades Callahan's junior, and the generational gap between them often felt like a chasm. It's not so bad, Chief, Green ventured, his tone cautiously optimistic. Crime rates have been down this quarter. Callahan snorted. Numbers on a page, Green, they don't tell the whole story. As they drove, Callahan's mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with the mayor earlier that week. The political pressure to address community concerns and show a more hands-on approach still rankled. In Callahan's view, it was just another way of saying the old methods, his methods, were no longer good enough. "You know why we're out here today, Green?" Callahan asked, his voice gruff. Green hesitated before answering. "The mayor's new community engagement initiative?" "That's right," Callahan confirmed, his tone dripping with disdain. "Apparently, writing tickets and keeping the peace isn't enough anymore. Now we need to be social workers and PR agents too." The car fell into an uncomfortable silence as they continued their patrol. Green's eyes darted between the street and his superior officer, noting the tension in Callahan's jaw and the white-knuckled grip he maintained on the steering wheel. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. "Unit 17, we've got a report of a car break-in on Maple Street. Elderly woman caller. Can you respond?" Callahan grabbed the radio. 10-4, dispatch, we're on our way." He flipped on the sirens and accelerated, a grim smile on his face. "Now this is more like it, Green, real police work." They arrived at a quaint house on Maple Street, where an elderly white woman stood wringing her hands on the front porch. Callahan approached her with a gentleness that surprised Green. "Ma'am, I'm Chief Callahan. Can you tell me what happened?" The woman, Mrs. Thompson, nodded nervously. I saw someone breaking into my neighbor's car. A young man. He was using something to jimmy the lock." Callahan's face darkened. "I see, and can you describe this individual?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated, her eyes flickering to Officer Green. He was a young black man, wearing a hoodie." Callahan nodded, unsurprised. "Not unusual in this neighborhood. With all these other kinds of people moving in, they always cause trouble." Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened, clearly uncomfortable with the chief's comment. She glanced at Officer Green again, who was maintaining a professional demeanor despite the clear tension in his jaw. "Green," Callahan barked, "go check out the car, see if you can find any evidence." As Green moved towards the car, Callahan turned back to Mrs. Thompson. "Don't you worry, ma'am, we'll take care of this. It's a shame what's happening to this neighborhood, isn't it?" Mrs. Thompson nodded weakly, too intimidated to voice her discomfort with the chief's attitude. After gathering what little evidence they could find, Callahan and Green returned to their patrol car. The chief was still muttering about the changing demographics of the neighborhood, while Green remained silent, his discomfort palpable. As they continued their patrol, Green's phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at Callahan, who was focused on the road ahead, before discreetly checking the message. It was from his wife, Sarah. "Everything okay at work? You seemed stressed this morning. Love you." Green's thumb hovered over the phone screen, a wave of emotions washing over him. He thought about the promise of a fresh start that had brought them to Milbrook, the hopes they'd had for building a life here. But the stress of the job, the constant tightrope walk between his conscience and his duty, was taking its toll. "It's fine," he typed back, the lie leaving a bitter taste in his mouth. "Just a busy day. Love you too." As he slipped the phone back into his pocket, Green caught sight of his reflection in the side mirror. The face that looked back at him seemed older, more careworn than he remembered. He wondered, not for the first time, how long he could continue like this, torn between the officer he wanted to be and the realities of a system that often seemed resistant to change. Callahan's voice cut through his reverie. "Eyes on the street, Green. We're not out here for sightseeing." Green straightened in his seat, his gaze refocusing on the neighborhood around them. But as they drove on, a gnawing feeling in the pit of his stomach told him that something had to give. He just hoped he'd have the courage to make the right choice when the moment came. Little did either of them know, that moment was rapidly approaching, in the form of a young girl's lemonade stand and a confrontation that would change all their lives forever. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Jasmine Carter's makeshift lemonade stand. She stood behind a folding table draped with a cheerful yellow cloth, a pitcher of freshly squeezed lemonade, and a stack of paper cups arranged neatly before her. A hand-painted sign propped against the table read, "Lemonade for charity, $1. Help support disabled children." Jasmine's eyes sparkled with determination as she called out to passers-by, her voice clear and confident. "Fresh lemonade. Help support a great cause." A few neighbors had already stopped by, praising her initiative and dropping extra dollars into her collection jar. As she poured a cup for Mrs. Johnson from down the street, Jasmine's mind drifted to the conversation she'd had with her father just a few days ago. It was one of those rare moments when Marcus had opened up about the challenges of his job, and the advice he'd given her still rang in her ears. "Jasmine," Marcus had said, his usually stern face softening as he looked at his daughter, "the world isn't always fair. There will be times when people judge you before they even know you, based on nothing but the color of your skin." Jasmine had nodded, a lump forming in her throat. It wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation, but somehow it felt more real, more urgent this time. Marcus continued, his voice low and serious, "But no matter what happens, remember this. You are strong, you are intelligent, and you have every right to be wherever you are, doing whatever you're doing." He'd paused then, making sure he had Jasmine's full attention. "If you ever find yourself in a situation where someone in authority is questioning you, remember these things. Always speak clearly. Don't let them rattle you, and if you need me, call. No matter what, I'll be there." Jasmine had hugged her father then, feeling the strength in his arms and drawing courage from his words. She knew her father's job often put him in dangerous situations, and his advice carried the weight of years of experience. Now, as she stood behind her lemonade stand, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just selling lemonade. She was taking her first steps towards making a real difference in the world. As the afternoon wore on, Jasmine noticed a group of white boys approaching. She recognized them from school. They were on the football team and had a reputation for being troublemakers. Her heart sank a little as she remembered their past bullying, but she steeled herself, remembering her father's words about standing her ground. "Well, well, well," the tallest boy sneered as they reached her stand. "Look what we have here. Little Miss Do-Gooder trying to save the world one cup of lemonade at a time." Jasmine straightened her shoulders, meeting their gaze steadily. "That's right," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Every little bit helps. Would you like to buy a cup? It's for a good cause." The boys exchanged glances, clearly taken aback by her composure. "We're raising money too, you know," another boy said, holding up a clipboard, "for new uniforms for the team. But at least that's something useful, not like helping a bunch of cripples." Jasmine felt a flash of anger at his words, but she kept her cool. "I think helping people who can't afford healthcare is pretty useful," she replied evenly. "But I'm sure your uniforms are important too. Good luck with your fundraising." The boys shuffled uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this response. After a moment of awkward silence, they moved on, muttering among themselves. Jasmine watched them go, feeling a mix of pride and relief. She had stood her ground just as her father had taught her, and it had worked. With no one else around, she paused to savor the satisfaction of making a difference. This felt like the beginning of her journey toward becoming a doctor, where her deepest goal would be to help others in meaningful ways. She pulled out her phone, scrolling to her father's number. She wanted to share this moment with him, even if he couldn't be there in person. The phone rang twice before Marcus's warm voice came through. "Hey, sweetheart, how's it going?" "Dad," Jasmine's voice brimmed with enthusiasm. "I've just finished setting up the stand. It looks great. I really think we're going to raise a lot of money for the Disabled Children's Fund at the community center." There was a pause, and Jasmine could almost see her father's proud smile. "That's wonderful, Jasmine. I'm so proud of you for taking initiative like this. You're really making a difference." Jasmine beamed at her father's words. "Thanks, Dad. I just wish you could be here to see it." "Me too, baby," Marcus replied, a note of regret in his voice. "But you know how work is. Listen, Jasmine." He hesitated for a moment, and Jasmine sensed a shift in his tone. "What is it, Dad?" Marcus sighed softly. "I just want you to be careful out there, okay? Keep your wits about you. You're doing a wonderful thing raising money for disabled children, but some people might not understand. They might even laugh at you or say hurtful things." Jasmine frowned slightly, confused by her father's words. But Dad, why would anyone laugh at helping disabled kids? I know it doesn't make sense, sweetheart, Marcus said gently, but sometimes people fear or misunderstand what's different. They might not see the importance of what you're doing. If anyone tries to give you a hard time or says anything offensive, remember to stay strong. Don't let them get to you. You have every right to be there, doing what you're doing. Jasmine's expression softened, touched by her father's concern and encouragement. Actually, Dad, I already had to deal with something like that. Oh? Marcus's voice sharpened with interest and concern. What happened? Jasmine recounted the incident with the group of boys from the football team. They came by earlier, trying to mock what I was doing. One of them said raising money for a bunch of cripples wasn't as useful as their fundraiser for new uniforms. And how did you handle it? Marcus asked, a mix of concern and pride in his voice. I stood my ground, Jasmine said, her voice strong and clear. I told them that helping people who can't afford health care, especially disabled children, is important too. I even wished them luck with their fundraiser. They didn't know what to say after that. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, and then Marcus spoke, his voice thick with emotion. Jasmine, I can't tell you how proud I am of you right now. You handled that situation perfectly. You stood up for yourself and for those who can't always stand up for themselves. That's exactly what I've always hoped you'd do. Jasmine felt a warm glow of pride at her father's words. Thanks, Dad, I just did what you've always taught me. And you did it beautifully, Marcus affirmed. But remember, not everyone will back down so easily. If anything feels off or makes you uncomfortable, don't hesitate to pack up and come home. Promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Dad, Jasmine replied, trying to keep the concern out of her voice. Don't worry, everything will be fine. That's my girl, Marcus said, his tone lightening. Go make a difference, I love you. Love you too, Dad, Jasmine said before ending the call. As she pocketed her phone, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her father's words had strengthened her resolve. She was doing something important, something that mattered. With a determined smile, she turned her attention back to her lemonade stand, ready to face whatever challenges the day might bring. As the afternoon wore on, Jasmine noticed an elderly woman approaching her stand. Her heart lifted as she recognized Dr. Eleanor Simmons, a retired physician who had given a career day talk at Jasmine's school last year. Dr. Simmons had been an inspiration to Jasmine, showing her that women, and especially women of color, could succeed in medicine despite the obstacles they might face. Well, hello there, Jasmine, Dr. Simmons greeted her warmly. I see you're putting your entrepreneurial skills to good use. Jasmine beamed at the older woman. Dr. Simmons, it's so good to see you. Would you like some lemonade? It's for a good cause. I'd love some, Dr. Simmons replied, fishing out her wallet. And let's make it a $5 donation, shall we? Now, tell me about this cause of yours. As Jasmine poured the lemonade and explained her fundraising efforts for those without healthcare access, Dr. Simmons listened attentively, a proud smile on her face. You know, Jasmine, she said after taking a sip of the lemonade, I remember when you told me about your dream of becoming a doctor. It's not an easy path, especially for a young black woman. There will be challenges, both big and small, but seeing you here today, taking initiative like this, it gives me hope. Jasmine felt a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, Dr. Simmons. That means a lot coming from you. Dr. Simmons reached out and patted Jasmine's hand. You're going to face obstacles, my dear. Some people will try to tell you that you don't belong, that you're not good enough. But don't you ever believe them. You have a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart. That's what makes a great doctor. As they continued to chat, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of determination. Dr. Simmons' words of encouragement, coming on the heels of her encounter with the football players and her conversation with her father, reinforced her belief in herself and her goals. However, their conversation was abruptly interrupted by the screech of tires. Jasmine looked up to see a police cruiser pulling to a stop at the curb. Her heart skipped a beat, but she took a deep breath, remembering her father's words. Speak clearly, don't let them rattle you. Chief Callahan stepped out of the car, his face set in a scowl as he surveyed the scene. Officer Green followed, a look of uncertainty clouding his features. "What's going on here?" Callahan barked, striding towards the lemonade stand. Jasmine straightened her shoulders, meeting the chief's gaze. "Good afternoon, officer," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. "I'm selling lemonade to raise money for charity. Would you like a cup?" Callahan's eyes narrowed. "You got a permit for this operation?" Jasmine's brow furrowed in confusion. "A permit? I didn't know I needed one. It's just a lemonade stand for charity." "Just a lemonade stand?" Callahan's voice dripped with sarcasm. "And I suppose the health department knows you're serving drinks to the public, or the business licensing office?" Officer Green shifted uncomfortably beside his superior. "Chief, maybe we should—" "Not now, Green," Callahan snapped, his attention fixed on Jasmine. "Young lady, I'm going to need you to shut this down immediately." Jasmine felt a surge of panic, but she fought to keep her voice calm. "Sir, I'm sorry if I've done something wrong. I can pack up if I need to, but could you please explain—" "Explain?" Callahan's voice rose, drawing the attention of nearby pedestrians. "I'll explain it to you down at the station. You're operating an illegal business and potentially endangering public health. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Jasmine's eyes widened in disbelief. "But sir, Now!" Callahan bellowed, reaching for his handcuffs. A small crowd had begun to gather, murmuring in confusion and concern. Phones appeared in hands, their cameras trained on the unfolding scene. Officer Green stepped forward, his voice low and urgent. "Chief, I really think we should reconsider." But Callahan was beyond reason. In a swift motion, he grabbed Jasmine's arm, spinning her around and slapping the cuffs on her wrists. The metal bit into her skin, and Jasmine bit back a cry of pain and shock. As Callahan began reciting Miranda rights, Jasmine's mind raced. Her father's words echoed in her head. "If you need me, call." But how could she call when her hands were literally tied behind her back? She thought of her father and wished desperately that he was here now. The crowd's murmurs had turned to outraged exclamations. "She's just a kid!" someone shouted. "This is ridiculous!" called another. Jasmine felt tears pricking at her eyes, but she blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As Callahan began to steer her towards the patrol car, Jasmine caught sight of Mrs. Johnson, her earlier customer, pushing through the crowd. "Jasmine, honey, do you want me to call your father?" Jasmine nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, please, tell him I need him." The back seat of the patrol car was cold and uncomfortable, the plastic seat unyielding beneath Jasmine. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, could hear their angry voices even through the closed windows. But more than anything, she felt a deep sense of injustice burning in her chest. Outside, Officer Green was engaged in a heated discussion with Chief Callahan. Though Jasmine couldn't hear their words, she could see the tension in Green's posture, the way he gesticulated forcefully as he spoke. Inside the car, Jasmine tested the cuffs, wincing as the metal dug into her wrists. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself. "Dad will come, he'll fix this." She knew her father's training would be invaluable in a situation like this, but she also worried about the consequences of revealing his true identity to the neighborhood. Meanwhile, on the street, Green was reaching his breaking point. "Chief, this is completely unnecessary," he argued, keeping his voice low but intense. "She's a minor, for God's sake. We're supposed to be protecting the community, not terrorizing it." Callahan's face was flushed with anger. "You questioning my judgment, Green? This is exactly the kind of disrespect for law and order that's ruining this town. Sometimes you need to make an example." Green felt something snap inside him. Years of compromising his values, of staying silent in the face of injustice, came crashing down around him. In that moment, he knew he couldn't be complicit any longer. "No, sir," he said, his voice steady and determined. "I won't be a part of this." Before Callahan could respond, Green strode to the patrol car and opened the back door. Jasmine looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. "I'm going to uncuff you," Green said softly. "It's not necessary to have you restrained like this. You're just a kid and you haven't done anything wrong." As Green worked on the handcuffs, Callahan stormed over. "Green, what the hell do you think you're doing?" But Green ignored him, focusing on Jasmine as the cuffs fell away. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Jasmine nodded, rubbing her wrists. Can I call my dad now?" Green hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his personal cell phone. "Here," he said, offering it to Jasmine. "Make it quick." Jasmine's fingers trembled as she dialed her father's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times before Marcus's voice came through, tense and worried. "Hello, who is this?" "Dad," Jasmine said, her voice cracking. "It's me. I need you. I'm in trouble." Marcus's tone immediately shifted from confusion to alert concern. "Jasmine, what's wrong? Where are you?" As Jasmine quickly explained the situation, Marcus felt a cold fury building inside him. He had spent years protecting his daughter from the harsh realities of racial profiling and police overreach, but now it had come to their doorstep in the most unexpected way. "I'm on my way," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Stay calm, baby. I'll be there soon." As Jasmine ended the call, she looked up to see Officer Green standing protectively between her and Chief Callahan, who was red-faced and shouting, "You're done, Green, you hear me? Your career is over." But Green stood his ground, his face set in grim determination. "No, sir," he said quietly. "I think it's your career that's in jeopardy now." As the confrontation between the two officers escalated, Jasmine sat in the back of the patrol car, her father's words echoing in her mind. "Stay calm. I'll be there soon." She knew that when her father arrived, everything would change. The neighborhood would finally learn the truth about Marcus Carter, and she couldn't help but wonder how they would react. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and waited for the storm that was about to break. Marcus Carter's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The normally calm and collected government agent was barely containing his rage as he sped through the streets of Milbrook, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Years of training and experience had taught Marcus to stay cool under pressure, to approach every situation with a level head. But this was different. This was his daughter. As he drove, memories flashed through his mind. Jasmine's first steps, her first day of school, the proud smile on her face when she announced her dream of becoming a doctor. Each memory fueled his determination to protect her, to shield her from the injustices he had fought against his entire career. Marcus had always known this day might come. As a black man in law enforcement, he had seen firsthand the systemic issues plaguing the justice system. He had hoped, perhaps naively, that his position and influence might somehow protect Jasmine from experiencing the harsh realities of racial profiling. Now, that illusion had been shattered. As he turned onto Jasmine's street, Marcus took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. He knew he needed to approach this situation carefully. One wrong move could escalate things further and put Jasmine in even more danger. And now he faced the additional challenge of potentially revealing his true identity to the entire neighborhood. The scene that greeted him as he pulled up was chaotic. A crowd had gathered around a police cruiser, their voices raised in anger and protest. In the center of it all, Marcus could see 2 officers engaged in a heated argument. Marcus parked his car and stepped out, his training kicking in as he assessed the situation. He could see Jasmine in the back of the patrol car, her face a mixture of fear and relief as she caught sight of him. As he approached, the crowd parted, sensing the purpose in his stride. Marcus could hear snippets of conversation around him. "That's Jasmine's father. Thank God he's here. Someone needs to put a stop to this madness. I wonder what he does for a living. He always seems so mysterious." Marcus ignored them all, his focus entirely on his daughter and the 2 officers. As he drew closer, he could hear their argument more clearly. "You're out of line, Green," the older officer was shouting. "This is insubordination." The younger officer, Green, stood his ground. "No, sir, this is doing what's right. We have no grounds to arrest this girl." Marcus stepped between them, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "Gentlemen," he said, "I believe there's been a misunderstanding here." Chief Callahan turned to Marcus, his face flushed with anger. "And who the hell are you?" Marcus met his gaze steadily. "I'm Jasmine Carter's father, and I'd like to know why my daughter is being treated like a criminal for running a lemonade stand." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "This is police business, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." But Marcus didn't move. Instead, he turned to Officer Green. "Officer, could you please let my daughter out of the car?" Green hesitated, looking between Marcus and Callahan. After a moment, he nodded and moved to open the car door. "Don't you dare, Green," Callahan bellowed. "That girl is under arrest." Marcus felt his control slipping, the anger he had been suppressing threatening to boil over, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that losing his temper now would only make things worse for Jasmine. "Under arrest for what exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Callahan sputtered, his face growing redder by the second. "Operating without a permit, health code violations, disturbing the peace." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A lemonade stand requires a permit now. And since when does selling lemonade for charity constitute disturbing the peace?" The crowd murmured in agreement, their anger palpable. Marcus could feel the situation balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong move from either side could tip it into chaos. Just then, Jasmine emerged from the patrol car, Officer Green standing protectively beside her. She rushed to Marcus, throwing her arms around him. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause trouble." Marcus hugged her tightly, his resolve strengthening. "You didn't do anything wrong, baby," he said softly. Then louder for everyone to hear, "You didn't do anything wrong." He turned back to Callahan, who was watching the scene with a mixture of anger and confusion. Marcus knew it was time to end this, one way or another. "Chief Callahan," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street, "I think it's time we had a serious discussion about what's happening here." The air crackled with tension as Marcus faced off against Chief Callahan. The crowd, which had been buzzing with angry murmurs, fell into an expectant hush. All eyes were on the two men, the contrast between them stark and telling. Callahan, red-faced and bristling with indignation, seemed to puff himself up, trying to reassert his authority. "Now, see here," he blustered, jabbing a finger in Marcus's direction. "I don't know who you think you are, but this is a police matter. You need to step back and let us do our job." Marcus stood his ground, his calm demeanor a sharp contrast to Callahan's agitation. He kept one arm protectively around Jasmine, who was trembling slightly against him. "Your job, Chief Callahan," Marcus said, his voice low but carrying clearly in the hushed street, "is to serve and protect. Can you explain to me how arresting a child for selling lemonade accomplishes either of those goals?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Callahan's eyes darted nervously to the sea of faces surrounding them, many still holding up phones to record the confrontation. He seemed to realize, perhaps for the first time, just how public this spectacle had become. "This isn't about the lemonade," Callahan snapped, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. "It's about following proper procedures. We can't have people just setting up shop wherever they please without proper permits and oversight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Proper procedures? Chief, I'm quite familiar with law enforcement procedures, and I can assure you, none of them involve handcuffing a minor for a first-time, non-violent offense, if you can even call this an offense." Callahan's face, already flushed, turned an even deeper shade of red. "You familiar with law enforcement, huh? What are you, some kind of lawyer?" A ghost of a smile played across Marcus's lips. "Not exactly, Chief, but let's just say I have some experience in this area." Officer Green, who had been watching the exchange with growing unease, stepped forward. "Chief," he said quietly, "maybe we should consider—" "Shut it, Green," Callahan barked. "You've caused enough trouble already." He turned back to Marcus, his hand unconsciously moving to rest on his holstered weapon. "I'm going to say this one last time. Step back and let us do our job, or you'll be joining your daughter for a ride to the station." The crowd gasped at the thinly veiled threat. Jasmine clutched her father tighter, fear evident in her eyes. But Marcus remained unruffled. He gently squeezed Jasmine's shoulder reassuringly before taking a single step towards Callahan. "Chief," Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight of authority that made even Callahan pause, "I'm going to give you one chance to de-escalate this situation. Release my daughter, apologize for this egregious overreach, and we can discuss this matter further through the proper channels." Callahan's hand tightened on his weapon. "Or what?" he sneered, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Marcus took a deep breath. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but Callahan had left him no choice. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his jacket. Jasmine's eyes widened. She knew what was coming, and while part of her felt relief that this ordeal would soon be over, another part worried about the consequences of revealing her father's true identity. Callahan tensed, his hand now fully on his gun. "Don't move," he shouted. "Keep your hands where I can see them." The crowd held its collective breath. Officer Green's hand hovered near his own weapon, torn between his duty to his superior and his growing certainty that this situation had spiraled far out of control. But what Marcus pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a badge, an FBI badge. "Chief Callahan," Marcus said, his voice ringing with authority, "I'm Special Agent Marcus Carter of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I believe you've just made the biggest mistake of your career." The revelation of Marcus's FBI credentials sent shockwaves through the gathered crowd. The murmurs that had been building throughout the confrontation suddenly hushed, replaced by a tense silence as everyone processed this unexpected turn of events. Chief Callahan stood rooted to the spot, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions, shock, disbelief, and a dawning horror. As the full implications of his actions began to sink in, his hand, which had been hovering near his weapon, fell limply to his side. Officer Green, who had been standing protectively near Jasmine, couldn't hide the look of vindication that flashed across his face. He had known challenging the chief was right, but the arrival of an FBI agent, Jasmine's father no less, was more than he could have hoped for. The neighbors, who had long speculated about Marcus Carter's mysterious job, were stunned. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. "An FBI agent? Living right here in our neighborhood?" No wonder they always kept to themselves. "Can you imagine? All this time and we never knew." Marcus held his badge high, the golden shield catching the late afternoon sunlight. His voice, when he spoke, carried across the suddenly quiet street with crystal clarity. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire world had paused, holding its breath in anticipation of what would happen next. Callahan was the first to break the silence, his voice a mixture of disbelief and desperation. "FBI, but that's impossible, you can't be—" Marcus lowered his badge slowly, his eyes never leaving Callahan's face. "I assure you, Chief, it's very possible, and very real." The crowd, which had been stunned into silence, suddenly erupted in a cacophony of voices. Phones were raised higher, live streams capturing every moment of this unprecedented confrontation. In the background, someone could be heard frantically calling the local news station. Jasmine, still standing close to her father, looked up at him with a mixture of relief and concern. The secret she had kept for so long was now out in the open, and she wasn't sure how to feel about it. Officer Green took a step forward, his face set in grim determination. "Agent Carter," he said, his voice steady, "I want you to know that I was against this from the start. I tried to stop the chief, but—" "I understand, Officer Green," Marcus cut him off, his tone professional but not unkind. "Your actions today will be noted in my report." Callahan, who had been sputtering incoherently, finally found his voice. "Now wait just a minute," he blustered, though his earlier bravado had evaporated. "This doesn't change anything. The girl was still operating without a permit and—" "Chief Callahan," Marcus interrupted, his voice sharp enough to cut steel, "I strongly advise you to stop talking. You've already violated the civil rights of a minor, engaged in racial profiling, and abused your authority. Every word you say from this point on will be included in my report to the Bureau, the Mayor's office, and, if necessary, a federal court." Callahan's mouth snapped shut, his face paling as the full weight of his situation crashed down upon him. He looked around wildly, as if seeking an escape route, but found only a sea of disapproving faces and raised smartphones. Marcus turned to address the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your concern and your desire to see justice done. I assure you, this matter will be thoroughly investigated. For now, I ask that you disperse and allow us to handle this situation." There was a moment of hesitation. Then slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to thin. Many lingered, phones still recording, unwilling to miss a moment of this extraordinary event. Marcus then turned his attention back to Callahan and Green. "Officer Green, I'd like you to take the chief back to the station. Inform the desk sergeant that Chief Callahan is to be placed on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation." Green nodded, a mix of relief and resolve on his face. "Yes, sir." Callahan, who had been standing in stunned silence, suddenly found his voice again. "You can't do this," he sputtered. "You have no authority here. This is my jurisdiction." Marcus's eyes hardened. "Chief Callahan, your jurisdiction ends where federal law begins. And you crossed that line the moment you put handcuffs on my daughter for selling lemonade. Now, you have two choices. You can go with Officer Green voluntarily, or I can place you under arrest for civil rights violations. Which will it be?" The fight seemed to go out of Callahan all at once. His shoulders slumped, and for the first time a flicker of shame crossed his face. Without another word, he turned and walked towards the patrol car, Green following close behind. As they drove away, Marcus finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He turned to Jasmine, who was watching him with wide, questioning eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "I'm sorry I couldn't keep your secret." Marcus sighed, pulling her into a tight hug. "It's okay, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. I'm sorry you had to go through this." Jasmine hugged him back fiercely. "It's okay, Dad, I understand, and thank you for everything." As they stood there, father and daughter reunited, the last rays of the setting sun bathed the street in a warm golden light. The lemonade stand, catalyst for so much drama, stood forgotten nearby. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a long journey towards justice and change. In the days that followed, the small town of Milbrook found itself thrust into the national spotlight. The video of Jasmine's arrest and the dramatic revelation of her father's FBI status went viral, sparking heated debates about racial profiling, police overreach, and the importance of community policing. Chief Callahan's career, unsurprisingly, was over. The mayor, facing intense public pressure, accepted his resignation within 48 hours of the incident. But the repercussions didn't stop there. A full federal investigation was launched into the Milbrook Police Department, uncovering a history of discriminatory practices and procedural violations. Officer Green, recognized for his attempts to de-escalate the situation, was hailed as a hero by many in the community. He found himself thrust into a leadership role as the department underwent a massive overhaul. It was a position he accepted with a mix of determination and humility, vowing to help rebuild trust between the police and the community they served. For Jasmine, the aftermath of the incident was a whirlwind of emotions and experiences. She found herself at the center of a movement, her lemonade stand becoming a symbol of resistance against injustice. Interview requests poured in, and civil rights organizations reached out offering support and platforms to share her story. But amidst all the chaos, Jasmine remained focused on her original goal. With the help of her father and the overwhelming support of the community, she organized a town-wide lemonade stand fundraiser. The event, which sprawled across several blocks and involved dozens of volunteers, raised over $50,000 for the community center and other local charities. Marcus, for his part, faced his own challenges. His cover as a local father with a nondescript job had been irrevocably blown. After much discussion with his superiors, he made the difficult decision to transfer to a desk job at the local FBI field office. It meant less excitement and more paperwork, but it also meant he could be there for Jasmine without the constant worry of his undercover status being compromised. The neighborhood's reaction to Marcus's true identity was mixed. Some were in awe, others felt betrayed by the secrecy. But as time passed, most came to understand the necessity of his discretion and appreciated the sacrifices he had made to keep their community safe. In the weeks that followed, life in Milbrook slowly began to find a new normal. The police department, under new leadership, began implementing sensitivity training and community outreach programs. Town hall meetings, once sparsely attended, were now packed with engaged citizens eager to have their voices heard. Jasmine, inspired by her experience, threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor, her dream of becoming a doctor now intertwined with a passion for social justice. She started planning a youth advocacy group at her high school, encouraging her peers to engage with local issues and make their voices heard. A few weeks after the infamous lemonade stand incident, Jasmine stood once again behind a folding table on her front lawn. This time, however, she wasn't alone. Lena, her friend who had once contemplated dropping out, stood beside her, a newfound confidence in her stance. Officer Green, off-duty and dressed in civilian clothes, chatted amiably with neighbors as he helped pour lemonade. And there, in the background, Marcus watched with pride as his daughter continued to make a difference, one cup of lemonade at a time. The road ahead was long, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges to face. But as he looked at the diverse group of people gathered on his lawn, united in purpose and community, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the scene, Jasmine caught her father's eye and smiled. In that moment, both of them knew that while the lemonade stand incident had changed their lives forever, it had also opened the door to a future filled with possibility and positive change. As the community-wide lemonade stand fundraiser was winding down, Jasmine noticed Dr. Eleanor Simmons standing quietly at the edge of the crowd. Their eyes met, and Dr. Simmons approached with a warm smile. "Jasmine, my dear," Dr. Simmons said, her eyes twinkling with pride, "I've been watching the changes you've sparked since that day. I saw what happened with Chief Callahan, and I must say you handled yourself with remarkable poise." Jasmine felt a rush of emotion at the older woman's words. "Dr. Simmons, I don't know what to say. Your words that day about the challenges I'd face, I had no idea how soon they'd come true." Dr. Simmons gently placed a hand on Jasmine's shoulder. "Remember when I told you it wouldn't be easy? I had no idea how soon you'd be tested, but look at what you've accomplished already." She gestured to the diverse group of people gathered around, united in purpose. "This is just the beginning, Jasmine. The road ahead will be challenging, but every life you touch, every person you help, feels seen and cared for. That will make it all worthwhile." Jasmine nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose wash over her. "Thank you, Dr. Simmons, for everything. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Dr. Simmons replied with a warm smile. "Now how about one last cup of lemonade for an old doctor?" As Jasmine poured the lemonade, she looked around at the scene before her. Her father chatting with neighbors, Lena laughing with some classmates, Officer Green discussing community programs with a group of interested citizens. She realized that her simple lemonade stand had become so much more than a fundraiser. It had become a catalyst for change, a symbol of hope, and a testament to the power of standing up for what's right. A simple lemonade stand that turned into a catalyst for change, reminding us all that even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences. Jasmine's story shows us the power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity. If you were Officer Green, torn between your duty and what you know is right, would you have stood up to Chief Callahan? And if you were Marcus, Would you have revealed your true identity to protect your daughter? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective. If you liked this story about Jasmine and her lemonade stand as much as I did, I've handpicked another one that will warm your heart just as much. Please don't miss it. Click here to watch it now.